You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 408 of the podcast. And in this one, I got on Jonny Say. Jonny is a UK-based therapist and co-director at the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy. And in this episode, we talk about the concept of acceptance from acceptance and commitment therapy. We discuss an update on Jonny, what do we mean by acceptance, resentment as a compulsion, blocks to acceptance and navigating them, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So really enjoyed this conversation with Jonny. I think it was a topic that needed covering, and hopefully it gives you some answers if you've been struggled or misled by this word acceptance. And thank you as always to you guys for listening. I deeply appreciate it. Without further ado, here is Jonny. Welcome back to the podcast, Jonny.
Thanks, Stu. Really good to see you again and be here again.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. And obviously we talk all the time, so but for the audience, it'd be good to get an update from you, so they know what's new with you, what you've been up to.
Yeah. I mean, I think people following the podcast will obviously be aware we've set up the Integrative Centre for OCD. So certainly a lot of focus has been going there, and we've been taking on board more therapists and clinical psychologists. Got a really great team, really nice group of people who are all very competent, very good and skilled therapists. So we've been training them up in ERP and ACT and compassion, doing group supervisions and getting everything set up. We're getting lots of people reaching out for therapy, which is both very sad, given the demand and the levels, but also, good to be setting people up with the right therapy and the right people. So obviously that's been a lot of the time. I'm still juggling having two young kids. So we've got a 4-month baby now, along with the 4-year-old. So I was just saying to you, Stu, before starting, my 4-year-old was up half the night. So dealing with those ups and downs of having little kids, but it's really fun and really great.
Yeah. And what I was going to say on the centre is, what you said about the demand being quite sad, that there's so much demand and not enough people meeting it. Definitely in the UK, that's the case. But I think the way I look at it now, because I've felt that way definitely since we started it. It's really good, obviously, for the centre and our therapists that we can feel, give them clients and stuff like that. But also, it's sad that we can't even meet the demand, despite how many we've taken on. But although it's sad, it would be sadder if we didn't start the clinic.
Yes. And hopefully we can have more and more impact, and hearing like mixed things as well, as people come to the centre, mixed experiences. Some people haven't had good experiences, including in the NHS, and good ERP experiences. And then some people having really the wrong type of therapy for OCD and really difficult therapy journeys. So a whole mix of experiences out there, to be honest.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so and obviously I'm sure we'll update everyone as time goes on and as we learn more. And we're trying to write blog posts and stuff on the website, which you can check out if you're interested. And I'm sure we'll do other things in the future, outreach things. Once admin side of things settle a bit.
We've got our group page up and our camp page up now as well, haven't we?
Yeah, so go check those out. Obviously, the OCD camp, which was the OCDcamp.com, it's now technically owned by the centre. We've integrated it into the centre. Jonny's drinking from an OCD Camp mug for those that can't see. And then Jonny was running a low-cost group option, ACT skills for OCD recovery, and we've now merged that into the centre too. So that's an option for those that either don't want weekly or can't afford it at this time. Then maybe the low-cost option is a good way to upskill and work on the OCD.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about acceptance. Obviously, acceptance in an ACT, acceptance and commitment. Can't speak. Acceptance.
Accepting your inability to say the words.
Accepting that I'm feeling like an idiot right now. Acceptance in an acceptance and commitment therapy frame. So I guess just initially, from this ACT lens, what is acceptance?
So ACT's view on acceptance is really, it's talking about experiential acceptance. So that means accepting the internal experiences that we can't control. And then that gets shortened to acceptance. In an OCD point of view or frame, that means accepting the obsessions and the related feelings. So it doesn't mean sort of resignation. People often worry that it means resignation to OCD and I'm going to be struggling with it. Or, people get worried that it means accepting the content of my OCD or something like that. But really, it's accepting we're having intrusive thoughts. It is difficult. We're having the urge to do compulsions. We might have strong feelings associated with that. And it's learning to accept all of that so we put less energy, physical energy, attention, physical action into trying to control all of that in a way that ultimately doesn't help. And as we all know, makes the symptoms worse through the OCD cycle. So we're trying to learn to drop all of that so we free up that time and energy and attention to focus on values and goals and things that are important and meaningful to us. So it's a sort of, it's an ancient concept. You hear about acceptance in, Stoicism, Eastern philosophy, actually even indigenous cultures. There's a lot of, acceptance within certain practices they did as rites of passage. And then, you hear about it in modern emotional regulation research, and lots of modern therapies have brought it on, including CBT and DBT and other places. Really, it's this kind of ancient concept. And then ACT, what ACT does that's different is that it really talks about acceptance of the internal experiences we can't control, and potentially external things if we really can't control them. But external, we're more thinking about what action we can take to improve an external situation. And normally there is something we can do to improve it, or to get support, or to find allies or people to help us. But the bit where ACT's very different is it really links that acceptance to values. So we're only accepting stuff so that we can do more values-based behavior. And that's jargon for doing the things that matter to us, being with the people who matter, pursuing goals that are meaningful.
Yeah, and I think, so I mean, you said it, but I just want to make a bigger deal out of it, because I've heard a lot. The thing that sticks out in my mind when I think about resistance to acceptance is I've seen so many times people say, and obviously I would have got stuck on this at one point, but people might say, oh, my therapist told me I just need to accept my thoughts. How can I accept my thoughts? They're horrible, right? Especially if they're taboo in nature, or that I'm going to get sick if I touch something. Who wants to accept that thought? But that's not what we're saying here, what ACT's saying, right?
No, it's saying accepting that we're having intrusive thoughts of that nature, and that trying to control them with compulsions isn't working. And this is where acceptance and workability really are linked together. Workability is, how does this behavior work for me over the long run? Does it work to give me the type of life I want to live, or does it not? And so we're always going like, we're not saying accept those frightening things as true or real. We are talking about accepting uncertainty, which is really obviously at the core of OCD treatment from the very beginning, and has really been well conceptualized by many CBT practitioners. But we're talking, can I learn to accept that I'm having these difficult thoughts, and actually the resentment and the struggle and the attempts to suppress and basically the hating on this stuff in my mind actually just makes it worse, and it feeds it all and gives it more. So acceptance is about learning to let go of that and accept I have these intrusive thoughts and not even engage with whether the content is relevant or means anything. We're not going, okay, I'm having thoughts about abhorrent, sexual ideas or harm ideas that, I know in myself, I'm not that person, or I'm worried I am that person, or whatever. We're not saying, oh, accept that content. We're saying, accept there's difficult thought coming up and we're having difficult feelings, and we don't need to engage with any of that. So really back to some of those ideas about the content not being important. To me, acceptance is all about that, really.
Mm. I agree. So as we make space or accept the presence of thoughts and feelings, regardless of what they are, it doesn't matter. We're then freer or have more mental capacity to focus on the things we want to do, our values, the things we want to get out of life, because we're not stuck wrestling with the content of our thoughts.
Exactly. And the difficult feelings. And it is incredibly difficult. I mean, I did not, naturally want to accept any of my OCD content. I spent decades not accepting it and trying to get rid of it and try different approaches. And as I've said in my story before, it was before therapy was widely known and understood. So I was trying all kinds of different practices and meditation and personal development and things to try and control these feelings. And I feel so passionate about it because it was really the shifting point for me when I decided to shift my frame of ERP from actually doing ERP, and we'll probably talk about this later, as a attempt to control and get rid of OCD, to flipping it to actually, I want to get very comfortable with these difficult thoughts, very comfortable with these difficult feelings, so that I can live my life and actually start doing things that matter. And I'd put everything on hold by that point, my career, my social life, hobbies, everything. I was just pulling away from everything. And so for me, it was such a changing point. And we'll sort of talk about how it interacts with ERP, I guess, a bit later. But I'm really passionate about it because of my own experience, and also seeing clients and seeing the clients that I work with who come in with an acceptance frame and are wanting to learn skills to help them with mental compulsions from ACT, and they're wanting to think about their values and tie their exposure more closely to values, things like that. But they're not trying to control their OCD symptoms. They're trying to, learn to handle them well and be present in their life. They're the people that progress really quickly. There's a kind of hockey stick trajectory. Whereas, if people come in and it's very hard to accept it, that we're going to have to do some work on, how is that struggle and resentment working for you? Is it part of the thing that's feeding the cycle? And I get it. I remember sitting with therapists when they were talking about ideas like this and thinking, you try and accept this. You spend a day in my mind and body and accept it. And it isn't fair. It isn't fair that we end up with these brains and, this hellish experience. At the same time, focusing on it not being fair just feeds it and makes it worse. And I think Stephen Phillipson was talking recently on your podcast about resentment being a compulsion. And, I really see it like that as well. And he was talking about measuring that resentment scale and trying to get that down to 0 as part of recovery. And I think that's such a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. And there's a Zen parable that sticks out in my mind around acceptance. And I'll just share it. And it's obviously an extreme parable. Would I ever get to this level of acceptance? I doubt it, but I like it because there's you may have heard it. I'm going to butcher it, but this man is walking through the jungle and then suddenly he comes across a tiger. He's terrified. He sprints away from the tiger as you would. And he doesn't realize there's a cliff edge. He falls off the cliff, and as he's falling, he grabs a vine that's hanging from the rock. Now the tiger's above him, looking down, ready to eat him if he climbs back up. down below is a huge drop. So whether he climbs up or drops down, he's dead. He knows this is the end for him. I assume the tiger would go eventually, but that's not I don't think that's in the parable. But in his mind, he's done for, right? And then as he's accepting his fate, he notices there's a strawberry on the vine, and it's the most like ripe, luscious strawberry. And he picks it and he bites it, and it's the juiciest thing he's ever had, and he's enjoying that moment. And I just like that idea. For me, that's kind of like acceptance. He's accepted his fate in the same way we can accept that we're having thoughts and feelings we don't like. And then we can still focus in on, well, what is good right now? Because it may not be the thoughts, but it might be something in my life or something I can work on or build. Maybe there's actual strawberries in your fridge that you could eat.
Yeah.
And they go off quickly, so eat them. But I just really like that parable to say, yeah, I can accept this stuff. And then also I can still find bliss in really scary, trying moments.
Yeah. And like the falling is like falling into avoidance. The getting up and going to the tigers, like falling into compulsions. And yeah, so we want to stay in the middle, not do those things. I mean, not avoidance is a compulsion, but you see what I mean? And, the strawberries is the values-based behavior. Yeah, for sure. I always want to mention that, like, we're really in OCD, we're talking accept the obsession, which could be the words, the images, the impulse, the sensation, emotion, the associated emotions with OCD that we can't control. We're not talking about the compulsion here. ACT has been very clear from the beginning that worry, rumination, thinking strategies are experiential avoidance. So they're compulsions, they're things that we should drop and we should be changing and replacing with values-based behavior. Not replacing to control it, but replacing because we've got that time and energy to do something else with. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to just accept I'm ruminating. I mean, ruminating is non-acceptance. That's we are struggling and fighting with intrusive thought, trying to control it, solve it. Acceptance is dropping that rumination and then accepting the intrusive thought. And I think ACT sometimes gets misconceived about that. I think the other thing I wanted to say at this point was, OCD really feeds off non-acceptance. I mean, sometimes people will sort of really say that's at the heart of it, right? Is that non-acceptance of these natural occurring intrusive thoughts is the disorder. Obviously, there's debate in that, and things like ICBT are coming in with different ways of conceptualizing it. But that's my experience in life. Like I very much remember, long before I knew I had OCD, I was in Malaysia with some friends. We were off there training, and we were having a conversation about intrusive thoughts. And I had loads of struggles with OCD by that point. And I remember two of my friends were just telling me about the intrusive thoughts they were having, and they were laughing, they were finding them funny. My mate was saying, yeah, like every time I go past electric, cables and stuff, I just want to grab it. I want to grab it and hang on to it. And he was laughing and finding it funny. And I was like, oh my God, like I've had fears like that before, and it's made me avoid every electric pylon. And, he was going near it and just like finding it curious and interesting. I recently heard a podcast, well, not recently, a while back, where the British comedian Richard Herring was doing a comedy bit about his intrusive thoughts. And it was when his daughter was young, and he was making jokes about, when you feel like you want to kick your daughter off a roof and things. And he was just finding it hilarious. And that is, most people, I mean, some people are so unaware of their brain, they don't even notice intrusive thoughts really, or they sort of deny it. But there's a lot of people that just find it weird and curious and interesting and funny. And then there's other people that are like, no, it just is meaningless. So people without OCD really have that a much bigger degree of acceptance of those intrusive thoughts, I would say. And I've had that experience of talking to non-OCD clients as well, when they've, described these sorts of things to me, and high degrees of acceptance of it. So really, we're trying to use ACT skills to train that ability that a lot of people have already of just not struggling and not taking them seriously.
Yeah. Is the chicken or the egg, right? Because do you think that they can accept it because there's not the emotional charge for them? Or is it we get intrusive thoughts, then we get the emotional charge? Or for some, is the emotional charge there and then I get the intrusive
It's
thought?
a really good question. I would imagine, I mean, it would be a good topic of research, right? But I would imagine that it is kind of both. I guess ACT says often high emotional charges are to do with struggle. So a panic attack depends on us bracing and tensing against it, judging the panic, worrying about the catastrophic outcome. All that struggle is the thing that amplifies it. And you can have different levels of panic. You can have, people that have panic attacks regularly, but have quite a degree of acceptance of it, so it doesn't become panic disorder. So I think, you can have a bit of both going on there. That probably, those of us with OCD have this sort of hyper morality and this worry about being a good person, feeling not good enough, worries about, control and agency and what thoughts and feelings will make us do. And I think a lot of the people without OCD don't worry about that. They don't think just because I'm having a thought, it means I'm going to do something. So they don't get the panic because they're not having all that worry. So I would imagine it's both, but I don't know. It'd be worth looking into that. And it's probably a good topic of research. Also, I do think there are different levels of panic and lack of insight with, some people are getting more intense feelings, are getting having less insight into, the ridiculousness of their intrusive thoughts and things. So I think there's so many variables in that mix, really.
Yeah, good points. And what you were saying there about non-acceptance, like you said, for you personally, if I think about my own journey, what was common about the time when I really struggled was, well, I wasn't accepting any of it. I didn't want any of it.
Yes.
Didn't want to have the thoughts, didn't want to have the feelings.
Yeah.
And then, a few years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago now, I kind of relapsed a bit. Again, the first few months of going through that, I didn't want the experiences. And that's why it was sticking around, because I wasn't allowing them to be there. And as I did start to allow them to be there, thoughts and feelings, I started to get better.
Yeah.
And,
exactly. I mean, when you described that phase for me, it was a very strong feeling, right? That was hard to accept. I don't think anyone can accept feelings like that easily. Like, we have to train, and sometimes we have new things come up. I mean, Stephen Hayes talks about very late in his ACT journey, he started having tinnitus really strong, and tinnitus is a great metaphor for OCD, right? And he found that he didn't go straight to ACT. It kind of caught him unawares, because he went down the medical route of treating it, first of all, because he basically says he was a punk rocker and he'd sort of damaged his ears. And so he was dealing with the aftermath of that. And then it was only when he was really resenting it and getting to the point where he even had some suicidal thoughts about it that he went, what are you doing? Why aren't you applying ACT to this? And then he did. And then very quickly he built up acceptance of tinnitus and hasn't been a problem. And of course, went on to do research on ACT and tinnitus and things like that because of it. So, you can be skilled in acceptance and things can catch you out, and I think we have to be honest about that. And I think I'd like to cover some of the ways ERP can set up non-acceptance in a minute, but I wanted to list some of the key barriers I've seen and see if you relate to them, Stu, and if you think of other ones as well. We've kind of mentioned some of them already, but it sounds like putting up with resignation. There's sort of no hope here in acceptance. There's fears that it means accepting the content. Well, we've talked a lot about that. Fears of losing control. So if I accept it, that's the thing that will make me go and act on the OCD, particularly with taboo themes and harm themes and things like that. And that can be the backdoor spike, right? As Stephen Phillipson describes it, that sense of, if I accept this, oh God, maybe I'll like it, or maybe I want to do it. And then we're back into compulsions.
And again, just to clarify that, accept the presence of the thought, right? Not the content.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. If I'm not figuring out whether I'll kill this person or whether I'll hurt this person, if I'm not on guard, then surely that evil person in me will just take over and do it
Yes,
if
yes.
I'm not monitoring it.
When the reality is actually we have more control over our actions and what we say and do and what we put our attention on with acceptance. And that's why ACT is used with people with personality disorders and more impulsive behavior, including offenders. I have colleagues and friends who work in prisons and things and use these skills to help people be less likely to harm people. Now, obviously, that's not relevant to OCD because there's not the same risk there. But that fear that, like, if I accept the presence of an intrusive thought, I'm going to act on it. Well, that's not your experience, right? We all have millions of intrusive thoughts about all kinds of things that we're not acting on, mostly neutral, right? Mostly neutral things that just come up. You have a memory, flashes back about somewhere you used to like to go. You don't instantly book a holiday to that place. You have certain like material objects. You kind of get intrusive thoughts. I'd like that car. I'd like this or that. You don't instantly go and rob the car and steal it and things. It's like intrusive thoughts in our experience are not causing behavior to happen. And everyone has that experience already. It's just that, like you said earlier, this comes with such a charge that it feels kind of different. And people are worried about sort of instability because of that strong emotion and charge. But really, if we accept strong emotions, we have more control. Back to the panic, the more I accept panic, actually, the less it's going to max out and peak into panic, which, as someone who's had hundreds and hundreds of panic attacks while I grew up, that's such a useful thing, really, with panic is acceptance. Hard, very hard to do because you don't want to accept it, but we can train to do it. So, yeah, the other one that we haven't maybe talked about so much is, it's not fair. Other people don't have to accept this. Like, why am I the one struggling with OCD and why do I have to accept it? And I think that is tough, right? We've all been there. We've all felt resentment. And I guess we can confuse grief and resentment. Like, there is a place for grief with OCD recovery and realizing how tough it's been and what it's taken away. But grief is this active process where we're feeling it, we're not ruminating and stuck in it and perpetuating it and kind of re-triggering our pain. We are adjusting and moving and accept. I mean, grief is about acceptance, right? There is, in Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, there is acceptance as a stage of grief, so but really, with it's not fair, I always think workability, that, like, yeah, it isn't fair. And, not everyone does have to struggle with this. But what happens when we get stuck in resistance and resentment? And actually, it just makes it worse. And, it feeds the problem. It puts our attention on the symptoms. So we're paradoxically getting more of them. We're tracking, monitoring, suppressing, struggling, basically doing compulsions and then getting more of the cycle. So we want to cut that off by, letting go of that. And then also everyone has something, right? 1 in 3 people post-pandemic in the UK with anxiety or depression. I mean, that's a lot of people dealing with difficult thoughts. May not be OCD thoughts, but, and I think there's different statistics. You might correct me on this, but the one I saw recently was 1 in 40 for OCD. But you got to imagine it's much higher than that, because who's reporting their taboo intrusive thoughts? Not a lot of people, and especially depending on where you are in the world, it's got to be much, much higher than that. So, a lot of people are struggling with this. Top 10 most debilitating physical illness and mental illness. I mean, a lot of people are struggling with this. So we're not alone. And that common humanity can be part of compassion, right? To feel not alone in this.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I haven't seen those stats. Obviously, they feel quite high, but I think I feel they could be true based on the pandemic alone, of like, we were all faced, a few people didn't buy into it initially, but most people did, I believe. The first 3 weeks it was going on in my head, I was like, oh shit, is this the end? Like, am I done for? Or is this the end for me?
Yeah. Well, the UK, it was 1 in 4 for anxiety and depression in a given year that you would have. So that's not, across the lifetime, it's even higher than that. But, that's the statistics I've seen quoted by like
1 in
The 1
40.
in 40. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I saw that. I think various OCD sources were sort of quoting that when I looked at it recently.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be higher than that,
Potentially, yeah.
really.
We're all faced with this mega existential threat, regardless of your belief of COVID now. At the time, no one knew, and arguably probably still don't know, but it was very real and very scary. So I can see that
Mm-hmm.
that is enough weight of a trigger to probably create mental illness in many people.
Yeah, the
You know,
stress latency sort of
stress, yeah,
ideas and things get activated
facing your
that are
mortality,
potential.
yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, I think also with the taboo, POCD. Who's disclosing POCD? It takes you to be at rock bottom and be in a safe place with a mental health system where you can, to some degree, disclose that. You think across the world, how few places have that opportunity. So and other subtypes as well, where it may feel very unsafe to reveal what you're going through. Um, of course, that's changing in lots of places. Fortunately, in the UK, hopefully, you could go to any NHS therapy service nowadays and disclose those sort of taboo, intrusive thoughts, and they are going to be understood as OCD. But not that's not everywhere in the world, right? That's possible. Um, and I just heard from some European clients where psychoanalysis is still the massively major model. And, they're not being judged for disclosing that stuff, but they're being encouraged to explore it and basically ruminate about it. So again, like you're not going to come forward, are you, if that's the type of treatment that's been offered? So for that type of OCD. It's too hard to accept is another big one. And this is across all disorders, not just OCD. A lot of people I work with feel it's just too hard to accept this depression or this panic disorder or the eating disorder or psychosis and other different phenomena. Like how could I accept this? And with OCD, yeah, it's very hard to do. But very trainable. And I think of it like a spectrum that can just deepen over time. When I came into therapy, I mean, I'd spent decades in non-acceptance trying to get rid of it. And then I started ERP and I had pseudo acceptance, which is this idea and act of like, if I accept it, maybe it'll go away. So yeah, okay, I'll accept it to make it go away. And of course, that just feeds the struggle. It has to be true, genuine acceptance where I'm accepting it so I can focus on values, not accepting it to get rid of it. And then the side effect, if you have true acceptance, is symptoms come down. Russ Harris is big fan of saying in 3,000 studies of ACT all showing the symptoms coming down. So we're not saying you don't get improvement in symptoms. We're just saying that isn't the primary target. And if you make that the primary target and chase that, it feeds the non-acceptance that then elevates the OCD and keeps our mind tracking and focusing and struggling with the intrusive thoughts. So yeah, but the acceptance spectrum increases over time. We can deepen it. That can feed into there must be a way to get rid of this. So people just keep trying new stuff. So they try, they may have tried lots of lifestyle stuff to try and control it, diet and various things there. And then they find therapy and they try lots of different therapy models, lots of different approaches to ERP, all trying to control it. And then they go, and I've worked with and have talked to people like this. They go, oh, it's not working for me. Okay, I'll try something else. And then they try different therapy models, personal development. They keep trying, thing after thing after thing. And I think at some point we've got to go, actually, this trying new approaches is part of the problem. It's a compulsion trying to control the symptoms. And so let's let go of that and get on with values-based living and doing the things that matter. Again, hard to do because everyone wants hope. Everyone wants hope that there's a magical cure that will get symptoms down to zero and, I won't be anxious anymore and I'll be able to achieve everything I want to achieve. Actually, no, we've got to get better at handling all that stuff and going for the things we want to achieve, which is tough, very difficult. And then there can be the related to pseudo acceptance. Am I doing this right? How do you do it? How do you accept? all that kind of secondary spike, analyzing the technique and what you're doing. And so we just have to try and use our skills to interrupt that, and as best you can practice acceptance. And we'll talk about some ways of doing it a bit later. Can you think of others that you come across in clients or the OCD community?
Off the top of my head, no. I think, yeah, the main one I see is, like I said, is with two things. This if I stop paying attention to it, like I just make space for it, I'm then going to act on it. And then also, I don't want to accept the misconception of I have to accept the content, not the actual.
Just they're the big ones, aren't they?
Yeah. And then with the grief and resentment, I guess those two go hand in hand, right? Of like, I'm grieving that I have to live this way, and then equally, I'm also resentful of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think resentment is like the ruminative part where we get stuck in going over and over why it's unfair and why it shouldn't be like this. And, and I don't want this, and hating on it. Whereas grief is more, for me, and the way I understand it, is quite a felt process, really, and is moving through the feeling of anger rather than the resentful thought loops, the feeling of sadness, the feeling of numbness, the feeling of acceptance, the feeling of love and connection as we, connect with other people who may have gone through what we've gone and also be working on recovery. So it's more of an active and felt sense that isn't, resentment stays stuck. It just keeps us going. This is unfair. Oh, another day like this. Oh, why do I have these thoughts? Oh, my family don't have this, or my friends don't have this, like, oh, this is stopping me doing everything I want to do. I can't be successful. Oh, this is just driving me mad. And that resentful going over and over and over in the rumination. And then sometimes people do that, they co-ruminate like that. So they go on discussion boards or with other people and go round and round like that. And sometimes it feels like a compulsion, like it's scratching the itch to begin with, but it just keeps us stuck. It keeps us focused on the issue. So it's not that we can't get connection. And at times we all probably need to vent and go, oh, this is really shit, and I've had a really tough day. And, and with my clients, I talk about, try not to go over the content there, just ask for a hug, or just ask for emotional support rather than going into what the content of OCD and the kind of resentment to that. But ultimately, co-support is more about taking action as well. So support and action and making changes and working on ERP and skills together. I think it works better.
Yeah, that makes sense. And something else comes up in my head, maybe not so much a misconception, but when I notice people, my clients they find it very hard to accept. Usually with my young clients, it seems to be more the emotion they struggle to accept, like that's this horrible feeling, especially with like disgust and emotions like that. And so there, I think there's we'd call it like a lack of willingness to not in a mean way, but they're not willing to feel these thoughts and feelings. And I thought that word is useful in ACT, but I just wanted to raise that of part of acceptance is increasing that willingness to have these experiences.
Definitely. And that's why we've got to tie it to values. And I think it's very hard for younger clients because these feelings might sort of come out of nowhere and suddenly be very intense, because as you're developing more conscious awareness of who you are and the person you are and the life you're having as a kid, you may have had intense emotions, but, if you look at young kids, to some degree, they move in and out of it and sometimes have quite a bit of acceptance, or especially if they're soothed and helped with it. But then suddenly you're on your own with these emotions. And for some kids, they're through the roof. I mean, for me, when I was young, I was just having panic attacks. And I remember when they first started, when I first remember them happening, age 6, and from then onwards. And it was just so, I could not have accepted at that point, and I wouldn't have really got why I would why acceptance would help. And it's only after many, many years of and realizing that struggle doesn't help and there's no way to easily control it without costs, then acceptance then starts to make sense. So I think sometimes your younger clients, as we've said many times, their life can be focused in their room. They can avoid a lot. They can avoid these feelings and still have hobbies and connection. And, that wasn't the case for me as a kid. Like, you couldn't have really just stayed indoors very easily because we didn't have computers in the same way and connection. So I think it is hard for younger clients, but I guess we've got to go workability. We've got to do gradual steps. Can we do little by little, face it a little bit more, face other difficult emotions? If the disgust is really hard, can we face frustration or, another mild emotion that's not so difficult, or physical challenges like exercise, get them to accept, being out of breath or tired or other things, and then try to transfer those skills into it. But it's hard. I mean, I think practicing together with clients in session is one of the ways to build it up, right, with that situation. Right. I mean, I think Jonathan Grayson says, like, quite provocatively, says acceptance sucks. I don't know if you've heard him say that, but I think, I get what he's saying. It's like, it sucks because you're going, my life isn't quite how I want it to be. And you're accepting that reality gap, as Russ Harris would call it. But I would say that goes a step further. It says, actually, it sucks at first, but once you get skilled at it, once you start pursuing your values more, your life changes. You start doing the things that you care about. You feel liberated. It can feel empowering to face it. You can get that sense of like strength and elation. Actually, some of my clients will feel elated when they're starting to do an exposure and they're starting to go, right, I could get my life back more because of this. So it sucks to begin with, but then hopefully if we're doing it right, it doesn't suck forever because it leads to a better life, and it leads to this skill that helps us throughout our whole life. We're going to have tough emotions. We're going to have physical pain. We're going to have difficult feelings and sensations and thoughts about other things other than OCD. So the better we are at coping with them, and this is what I sometimes call the silver lining of OCD, is that if we get good at accepting these really awful thoughts and feelings, then actually what else can challenge us? What else is a problem? And certainly I've experienced that with challenges in life. Things have been so much easier since, getting the skills down.
Yeah, really good point. Really good point.
Yeah, I wanted to spend some time on why ERP can make it hard to accept sometimes the way it's framed. I think, really good ERP and clients that I've worked with who have had very good experiences of ERP, and they might be coming for some compassion and ACT to go on top of that, but they've experienced really good ERP. They've developed a lot of acceptance, and it's been framed that way. And I think a lot of your guests talk about acceptance. A lot of people are on board with that idea. But sometimes when you have this sort of simplistic view of ERP, where it's the gold standard, highly effective, it sounds like it's simple, effective and reliable and predictable, and it will work for everyone, and everyone's progress will be linear and perfect. And I just saw in Kimberly Quinlan's book, she's got this brilliant graph when she goes, the expectation of OCD recovery, and it's like this linear line, and then the real one, and it's this wiggly line going all over the place, and sometimes it's progressing, sometimes you're getting worse, and hopefully over time it's still going up. But it's, I think that's a really good way of viewing it. But, sometimes people end up going like, it's not working so simply and predictably for me. Either there must be something wrong with me, or there must be something wrong with ERP. And I think that's where, you want to give people hope and give them the evidence base and, what we know about it being useful and effective. And you don't want to sort of say that actually your progress may be, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and, times, and it might plateau, and you might have setbacks and relapses. You don't really want to put that in someone's mind. At the same time, it can mean people start to use ERP for non-acceptance. So they're like, right, it's so effective, it's going to work like a medicine that's predictable. Okay, I'm going to control my symptoms. And that all feeds non-acceptance, I would say. So I think sometimes being honest that, progress isn't linear. You can have setbacks, you can have relapses. Go out there in the OCD community, attend a conference. No one's talking about a simple linear progress where they, did ERP and got better in this completely predictable line and stayed better for the rest of their life. It's much messier than that. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It doesn't mean that it's highly effective and, along with other things like ACT, can really produce long-term change. It's just that it's much messier. And I think there's not enough honesty about that. And that can set people up for sort of non-acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. Yeah. So let's think skills. So how as a therapist, are you trying to help your clients learn the skill of acceptance? Like what sort of tools, skills, exercises?
Well, if someone is on board with it, then we're moving quite quickly into progression of ACT skills and into ERP with ACT skills. And actually through that process, they are learning more and more acceptance. It might be a bit of a spiral that deepens over time, as I said, but some clients are coming in like that, all on board, and they've often had, various rounds of therapy and ERP and stuff before, and they've hit that point of, acceptance is going to be the thing that helps me. And then I'm doing things like dropping anchor that we've talked about, urge surfing, diffusion, dipping in and out the stream, all practices you can find on my YouTube channel to get basically the RP skills, the response prevention skills really strong, and the acceptance of difficult feelings really strong, so that we can go and do the ERP and do it in a values-based way, right? Where it's tied more to values rather than just exposures out of a cookbook. Instead, we're going what matters to the person and how best to sort of approach that. But most people, it's not that simple. Most people were having to do a lot more workability because they're not ready to accept it, and it's very difficult to accept it. So we might be looking more at their experience and what does it tell them, and does trying to control this and resenting this and approaching treatment as a control strategy, does that work? And trying to deepen that, if I give into the OCD, does that work? If I don't accept it, does it work? Really trying to build up that, contact with the costs and what it's taken away, and then building up the values and goals as the motivator for acceptance. So spending longer on all of that. Metaphors, right? ACT is a big fan of metaphors, and there's research that says like 10 years after therapy you'll remember a metaphor where you won't remember any theory at all. So I think metaphors are very, very useful. The quicksand metaphor I like, or tug of war with a monster. We've got to drop that rope and stop fighting with it. The annoying party guest. All these classic ones, or metaphors that are more relevant to the client depending on their interest and life. And then really dealing with the resistance, what I call secondary spikes. So these ways that OCD and our mind resist the process of letting go of compulsions and approaching the fear and the challenge and the difficulty. So we have to be very clear about how is it resisting it. Is it a resentment spikes coming up, and you're doing the exposure work and practicing skills, but you're going, it's so unfair, I don't want this is annoying, and or is there another type of resistance coming up, and really working with that. Self-compassion, I would say, adds another layer on top of acceptance. Really, it sort of deepens it. I think of it like a balm. If you have a muscle injury, you massage it, but you also put some kind of warming balm on it, and it helps you with the pain of that. It doesn't get rid of the pain, but it helps you, deepen acceptance. So, I'll do compassion work, especially if someone has a lot of shame in there and guilt and self-criticism. And so it's all about the resistance really, as well as we go through these ACT skills and ERP, working on the non-acceptance and deepen it. And you can do, if it's non-acceptance of feelings, you can do acceptance for feelings practices from ACT, like name, and you can use self-talk, acceptance self-talk, to try and prompt, okay, I'm going to accept this, going to practice allowing this. If you say to yourself, I'm accepting this, and that feels ingenuous, then you can say, I'm going to practice in accepting this, I'm going to practice allowing it. And that language can just point you at the skill, using the values to help, coming back to that regularly to deepen that acceptance and why we're accepting, what it's all for. And yeah, it's really like ERP, emphasizing the RP, and, people use different, I love ACT because it was most helpful for me, but people use metacognitive therapy, people use rumination focused ERP, DBT, mindfulness approaches, lots of different ways you can work on that response prevention. But, I'm passionate that is a skill. It's not something that everyone could just do easily. You have to build it up and work on it. And same with this resistance. You can't just drop the non-acceptance right away. You have to train it and practice it.
Yeah, really, really good point. So is there anything else you wish you could have said today on the topic of acceptance?
I think with the ERP, I think sometimes some of the non-engagement responses can risk being non-acceptance. So I think all of those responses can be done skillfully and done with acceptance. But if I'm saying something like maybe, maybe not, or sarcastically exaggerating the OCD, or agreeing with the worst case scenario, any of those sorts of responses can be done with this goal of like trying to get rid of it and non-acceptance. So I think anything you're doing like that, we have to really make sure that's to deepen acceptance really, and ultimately deepen response prevention, not to control. But I've worked with lots of clients when those strategies are becoming non-acceptance really and making the problem worse. So that was one thing that I wanted to mention. I think the other one, like, I've been thinking about sort of levels of recovery in a way, and I don't like to kind of grade and rank recovery, and it's not meant for that purpose. It's meant for us to kind of look at where we are and see how we can deepen our recovery. And we all can, and no one's at the end of their journey. And even when OCD is less of a problem, we're all human, we're all working on stuff. And, you can have big blind spots and things you need to work on. That being said, I think of like that first struggle level where we're really caught in the OCD cycle and episodes and really, really having a very difficult time. Then we might have a middle, like a second level, where we have had some useful ERP and maybe some skills and we're somewhat better, but there's still quite a lot of pseudo acceptance and struggle. We might be relapsing fairly regularly and having to go back and, do ERP again, or, we're new themes are coming up, things are jumping around, and we're better. It's definitely better than step one, but we're still a bit caught in the cycle of it. And then I think the third stage is really very related to acceptance, where we've really changed our whole relationship with our mind. We're not taking our thoughts so seriously, and importantly, we really can observe our mind and not react. Our response prevention skills are really high. Our connection to values, our life is more built around values-based choices rather than OCD-based choices and avoidance. And really we've changed our fundamental relationship with the intrusive thoughts and difficult feelings, and that's where we want to get to. And that's so built about acceptance, that really is. And you might still have times where you have more intrusive thoughts or high anxiety or other difficult, or depression or other difficult emotions, but you're able to handle it and go through it and move through it without it derailing your life. And you might go back and pick up your hierarchy and re-engage with your ERP, or deepen your ACT skills or whatever you're using. But ultimately, you're not caught in this cycle of like whack-a-mole with OCD themes, or sort of really fighting with it. You know, your life focuses on something else.
Really good point. Really good point. Well, look, thank you, Jonny, for coming on, talking about acceptance. I appreciate it. It's a good conversation. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/theOCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.